Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this webinar starting. And yeah, we've been waiting quite a while, so let's get started. So thanks so much for spending the time and joining me on this webinar. It's going to be exciting, and I'm going to share some information that I'm sure you're not going to hear in any other place. And I know that from being a user in the webinar, in the other side, I know that there's always one question that we have to get started with, and this is what about the recording? So you can be calm and know that you're going to get a recording of that. So if you have some issues, you'll be able to get back to that. And I'm sure you're going to get a lot of information that you may want to follow up on and share with your colleagues. So a recording would be sent to you over, I guess, within the next 48 hours or so. So let's get started. Before we start, I wanted to introduce myself. I know some of you may not know me yet. So my name is Tal, and quick background, I originally come from software engineering, where I spent my first professional decade in software engineering. And then I moved into user experience design. And over the last 17 years or so, I actually designed around 7.5 billion pixels. This may sound a lot. It is a lot. It's something like more than 250 digital products, which I designed so far. So my most years were focused on figuring out human behavior and how it could be managed with effective design. And basically, this is what it's all about. And this session is going to dive deep into that point of view. So coming from software engineering and moving into user experience design, I actually published a book. I wrote a book about user experience design, which was originally published in Hebrew, and then it was translated to English and actually Chinese as well. So I have some experience in that. And I also won the User Experience Award in 2014 for a redesign for a digital product that I actually redesigned and won this award. So some reputation around the world of user experience. And this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the user experience of content and how it evolves over time. So it may maybe sound strange that a user experience designer who actually spends most of his time designing interfaces would actually move into audio. So why the hell would I do such a twist in my process and my work? And actually, the reason for that stands behind my activity as a teacher and as a speaker over the years and as a consultant. So let me take you a few years backwards, where over the years I basically spent most of my time doing user experience design for companies and teaching about that. And I had the need to always be the one that is the most up to date and has the most updated knowledge to share that with my students and colleagues and people I consulted. And I actually didn't find the time to stay up to date with all of the information that I have to digest. So I tried to figure out how I may be more productive and find the ability to get to know more. And this is where I started understanding that we live in an era of too much information. Too much information is bombarding us from everywhere, and we have to stay up to date. And it's basically impossible. There are millions of different categories that are relevant for a user experience designer, and I wasn't able to stand in pace with the amount of content that's kind of attacking me. So I hired Michelle. Michelle was a professional personal assistant from the Philippines, and what I asked Michelle to do is summarize the articles that I wanted to read but didn't find the time to read. So I actually I created a Google Sheet and shared it with Michelle. And whenever I bump into an article that I wanted to digest, I asked Michelle to summarize it for me and send over a summary to my email. And this looked like a very promising opportunity to be super productive with the assistance of Michelle. But this turned out to be not to be working. So after a few weeks, I found myself having a new folder in my inbox called Summaries from Michelle, which had 40 unread items. And then I found out that I don't really digest that. So I created a new problem, which is more information packed and not digested. And this is where I added some creative thinking. And instead of saying goodbye to Michelle, I actually hired another person to my personal assistant team. And this is where Jason joined the story. Jason is a professional narrator. And what I asked Jason to do is record out loud the summaries that Michelle creates. So instead of asking Michelle to send me the summaries, I asked Michelle to send over the summaries to Jason. And I asked Jason that when he finishes his formal work in his studio, he had a home-based audio recording studio. So whenever he finishes his serious formal work, I wanted him to record the summaries from Michelle. And I asked him not to do it too formally because it was just for me. So no need to be very dramatic or do some fixes. He could breathe and say the same sentence twice or whatever he needs just to get it out. And I started receiving audio summaries to my to my email, and this is where I started to be very productive. So the first time I got an email from Jason, I had 3 audio summaries attached to that, MP3 files. And within something like 7 minutes, I was able to tell you what's written in 3 different articles, which was mind-blowing for me. And I always use a metaphor that I bumped into on a few years ago. You're probably familiar with this scene from the Matrix. So Neo is plugged into a device.
I know Kung Fu.
And he has the ability to know Kung Fu without actually learning. And this is where I found my I know Kung Fu moment and started to be very productive by knowing some stuff without having the need to actually read and consume that. So I want to tell you that there is a big problem. Statistics talk about 7 million blog posts which are published every day. This means that you're not going to find time to stay up to date because there's no chance you're going to be able to do so. So more and more content is created, and the updates with AI don't really help us. They allow more content to be created. We'll dive into that and the meaning of AI-based content in Google in a few minutes. But more and more content is being created on a day-to-day basis. And we actually need to know more. So we actually fight with that on a daily basis. And the other side of statistics show how this affects human behavior. So one of the statistics on how people actually digest content talks about the fact that people spend in average 37 seconds reading a blog post. And I can tell you the reality, which is that within 37 seconds, you don't have enough time to read a blog post. So usually what we do is we scan the page and kind of go through the content. We read the main title and then go through the subtitles and then figure out that it's not interesting, and then we can close the tab. Or alternatively, we can actually do the same thing and understand that it is valuable and then stop and leave the tab open for later. And I guess you know what happens later. Basically nothing. So we go on and don't digest anything at the end. So Houston, we have a problem, too much information, and we don't really digest it. 2 years ago, maybe the most significant research organization that does the research about user experience design, the Norman Nielsen Group, which if you're familiar with user experience design, you're probably familiar with them. They did a wide research. This is the second time they do this research. It was an update for the research, and they tried to figure out how people read content on the web. And they actually shared a report which is 450 pages long. I read some of it. And it's super interesting. It talks about the way people digest content. And if I would like to summarize it for you, the most important element that appears there is that they figured out that people don't really read content on the web. They actually browse through the content and scan through that and keep it for later, but they don't really read the content from start to end. So we write content, but there's nobody out there who actually digests that. This requires me to take you for a quick journey on cognitive behavior and the operating system of how human beings are actually working with text. So let me share with you a quick overview of how the human operating system works. So the cognitive cycle goes like this. You are in front of a computer, you look at the screen, you get information using your visual senses, and you may also use your auditory sense and so on. Most of the information you get from your senses comes from your eyes. Around 95% of the information we digest. And then it goes into the perception process where we actually process the information that we got according to the situation that we are at and the function that we try to achieve. At the end of the processing flow, we have a decision-making point where we decide what we do with the information that we got. Some of it may include an action, such as moving your finger across your smartphone and swiping, or using the keyboard, or running, or talking, or whatever. Sorry. And then the interface in front of you provides the feedback. Give me a second. The user interface in front of you provides you a feedback, and you get that feedback mainly with your eyes, and also this may be a feedback that you hear. And then this cycle goes on and on. If we look specifically at the perception process, we have another element which is super critical to understand, and this is where attention takes place. Attention basically tries to help you focus. It tries to help you focus on the most critical element that you got from your senses based on the action that you're trying to achieve. And it actually blocks every other information that you do not use. And this mechanism is pretty critical, because what it basically does is blocks a large part of the content that you actually get. Another element that's in our cycle is memory. I'm not going to talk about that for now, but I'm actually going to focus on the sensation and the attention. And then we go into trying to figure out how texts are perceived. So you basically see text, but then you have to decide that you're going to read it. And then you read only some of it, trying to get to the next thing you try to achieve. Basically, texts are very hard to consume. They're not hard to consume to someone specifically. They're hard to consume in general, because our cognitive cycle is not optimized for digesting text. When communicating with others, you can see that when a baby is born, they basically communicate with faces, reactions, and noise, and then voice and speaking. And reading and writing takes much more time. It goes through the ages of 5, 6, 7, and so on. You have to go to school, practice, and only then you achieve this ability of reading. And actually, it's pretty amazing, but the time that the brain needs to process text is 60,000 times longer than the time it takes our cognitive processes to digest a visual element, a color, an icon, or stuff like this. And we are in 2024. We try to be super productive, and then we try to do things faster. Text doesn't allow us to do that. But one thing that has been evolving around us allows us to do things much quicker. And you probably know what I mean. I'm talking about a new way to communicate, which was kind of evolving through technology, and basically taking us back to the times where we didn't have writing. And this is where we have emojis. So emojis, and if you look specifically at that awesome emoji, see how much information you get without the need to read even a single word. And it would probably take a few words to actually describe what we see in front of us now. The formal definition of that emoji is disgust. And I can talk about emojis for hours. Let's do it quickly. This is an emoji I'm always talking about, because I think I had a conversation with my father who was asking what exactly does this mean. And it's interesting because my father taught me how to speak, and the definition is tears of joy. And then we can look at other emojis just to cover something, and you probably know what this emoji means. So if you assume this is a thank you emoji, you may find it interesting that the original definition of that emoji is a high five. These are two different people who are face to face, and they give high five. And another one, sorry for doing that, another emoji that's worth mentioning is this one. So the original brief was not poop, it was a chocolate ice cream. So sorry for breaking that definition and sharing it with you, but the original brief was talking about something positive, but we human beings actually found it very useful for a different thing. And this is where we started using that. So there's a very interesting evolution on emojis and how we actually communicate. But the main thing I want to talk about is the fact that we try to be as effective as possible and share as much information and make it as easy to consume as possible. And this is where texts are much less effective than visuals. So we see an evolution, and you can talk about the meaning of that and the meaning of education and where education goes and where the brain of young people is going. But from an effective communication point of view, emojis are much more effective in transferring a message between human A and human B. So I'd like to give you a point of view of looking at content consumption over the last few decades. And this is something that I've been dealing with since I started designing user interfaces. And I think I can give you a kind of a cover of what represents the communication on each one of the decades over the last 40 years. So I'll start with the decade of the 90s. And I represent this decade of communication using the term RTFM. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, but if you're not, RTFM means read the fucking manual. And read the fucking manual basically talks about the communication we have with the software provider that we have. We find it hard to actually use the platform, and then we ask for support. And the tech people who created the software don't really want to talk to anybody. So this is why they created a document, user guide or user manual, and they expect me to read it. So I think in the 90s, there was an expectation for me to actually read the manual. And I think over the years, we figured out that this doesn't really have any place in our lives. And then we got to the year 2000, where internet became wide enough to spread an endless amount of content, and we got to the too much information era. And this is where I personally had my main problem. I come from, I'm a Generation X. I was born in 78. And when I was educated, I was always educated based on the assumption that I needed to read. And then came the RTFM era, which expected me to read the manual. And since I wasn't able to do that, I always felt uncomfortable because I couldn't keep in pace with the amount of content that I need to know. And this is where I was feeling like I'm always losing. This is the too much information era for me. And then happened something super interesting happened. We moved into the next generation and era. And this is where Generation Y became old enough to get into the business world and start becoming employees. And this is where they came into a world where they were already born into a too much information world. And since they were born in a too much information world, they don't expect themselves to read because they don't have any chance reading the amount of content that's out there. Unlike what I experienced as a young boy trying to use text for education. And this is where Generation Y brought their point of view, which I can summarize with the term TLDR, too long didn't read, which indicates the fact that if you would like to communicate with them, knowing that there is too much information, it's your job to digest the content and bring it in a way that would actually cut through the noise. If you're not going to do that, it's basically your fault. You don't have any reason to expect them to do something else because there's too much information in the world and it's not their personal problem. So they're not angry at themselves, they're angry at you. Or they just don't care about you if you're trying to communicate like you used to. And over the last few years, I was trying to figure out what would be the next phase, because we are in 2024 and I need to figure out what's the meaning of the next generation. And I think this is where I came out with the understanding that we can say goodbye to how we used to consume texts. And I don't mean that text is going to disappear, but I think there's a very interesting evolution of the communication we all have. And if your audience is young, do look at how they communicate with each other, even in messages in their WhatsApp or messaging app, and you'll see that they record audio instead of writing because they prefer to do a direct, easy to produce and easy to digest communication, where whenever my daughter sends me an audio message, I'm basically angry because then I need to pass into audio listening state of mind, and I'm used to being reading state in reading state of mind. But she doesn't really understand why she needs to translate what she wanted to say into words and write them instead of just say it, which is the natural way. So if you look at terms that we use, tone of voice, storytelling, and so on, voice of the customer, they talk about the basic communication of audio. And I think what we're seeing is the evolution where audio becomes much more natural way to pass information between human beings. And this is where I get to Summurai. When we started creating Summurai, we basically wanted to bring that simple communication, which is based on audio, to the community and allow it to be used by companies and organizations and their audience. This could be their workers and this could be their customers. Summurai is basically a mix of summaries, if you remember Michelle, and samurai warriors who are in charge of guarding the assets of landlords. So 900 years ago, samurai warriors were in charge of guarding the assets of their landlords. They were very educated and also pretty problematic people to fight with. And the way they used their sword is to fight anyone who tries to come against and do something bad to your landlord. And what we do today is try to do the same, where landlords would be your audience. And the samurai sword is aimed to cut content into shorter pieces and also cut content that's not relevant and make it keep and guard your main asset, which is your time. So this is the philosophy behind Summurai, but I want to talk about audio. So let's talk about the state of audio. If you look at the evolution of audio, you basically see that if you look at the different types of media, everybody talks about text. We know what text can do for us, from a tweet to a long form book. We know what visuals we can use. We know everything about video, from a long form cinema video to a story in TikTok, but we actually don't know too much about audio. So I think there are 3 stages of awareness when I'm talking about audio, and I've been talking about audio for quite a few years. So if I go 7 or 8 years ago backwards, when I was mentioning audio, I was getting the feedback of audio, you mean video. So people were kind of focused on the understanding that video is the main thing, and they didn't really figure out why audio is interesting and why do I actually talk about that. Over the last few years, audio became such very popular, and I don't need to explain why audio is relevant. But whenever I'm saying audio, people say, yeah, we listen to podcasts. So they automatically translate the word audio to podcasts and talk about the effect of podcasts and whether they try to produce a podcast or they use that or they visit podcasts as hosts, as guests, or so on. But the awareness stage that I'm trying to open the door for you is the next phase, where you understand that there's much more to understand about audio besides podcasts. And this is where we're going to be today. So basic understanding that I want to share with you is the fact that audio is much more than podcasts. And actually, podcasts are just one form of communication within a very large land of uncharted territory of audio consumption. And podcasts are usually kind of in between professional and entertainment. They're usually based on a conversation between 2 or 3 people. They're usually around 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Joe Rogan's podcast episodes could be 3 to 4 hours, which is crazy. And this is what we know about that. But is this the only form of audio? The answer is no. And the answer is that we're going to find more options to use audio for our communication. This is where I want to take you. So I think audio brings a new opportunity where video and text are full and are crowded. And if you want to get attention, the only place where you have the ability to get attention is where there's no competition. And this is where audio opens a very interesting door for you, and we're going to do that together. So looking at the evolution of audio from the lens of podcast consumption, we can see what happened over the last few years. So we started seeing the rise on podcast consumption, and this is the US market over the last few years. And then came COVID. And the assumption was that we're not going to continue listening like we used to, because there was a connection between driving time and listening time. And on COVID, we actually stopped driving for a while. And what happened, interestingly, is that podcast listening started to continue growing, even though we stopped driving. And what we found out is that podcasts are much bigger than driving time. They actually provide an alternative for getting knowledge and achieving the information, the knowledge that you're trying to achieve, while not being in front of a computer, which is super interesting, even if you're not driving. And what we see is a continuous growth in content consumption through podcasts. And this is kind of getting more and more relevant and getting into different generations and audiences. And everybody knows what podcasts are, basically. If you look at the next 4 or 5 years or so, you can see that podcasts are becoming a giant market. You can see the text-to-speech, which I'm going to talk about, is also growing. And we can see that audiobooks are also growing. So every different type of aspect of audio is showing growth. And this is basically, it fits the understanding that there's too much information and we need the ability to digest that in different ways. So what's the benefit of audio? First thing is that you can listen to audio from any device you may have. Second thing is that you have the ability to consume it on the go, which is super interesting. I'm going to dive deeper into that in a second. The next thing, and basically the most interesting thing, is that unlike video and text, I have the ability to digest audio while doing something else, while doing a main activity, which does not require my 100% attention, but it requires my eyes. So if I'm driving or walking my dog or doing some sport activity, I cannot be in front of a PC or a monitor, but I am available for digesting information as a secondary activity. And this is where audio becomes super interesting. This is why podcasts are growing tremendously. Production of audio, which also is going to be a subject I'm going to talk about in a second, is actually pretty cheap. Unlike video productions, the professional recording with cameras and studios and makeup and so on. Of course, video production with a smartphone became simple as well, but I'm talking about professional video production. And another element is that it provides some ability for people with language barriers and this ability is to actually digest your content as well. So accessibility is another element that's super interesting for us. So let's talk about optimizing content journeys. And I think the most interesting question companies and content creators should ask themselves, and there's one question I would like you to take from all of this session, is the most important question I teach content creators and companies to ask. And this is not what type of content you want to create, but when do you expect your audience to consume the content you created? And it's pretty simple in certain time to answer that and figure out that the content that you are creating is basically irrelevant because it doesn't fit the way you would like people to consume that content. So let's jump into that for a second. So I'm splitting the types of content in the world into 3 types. Type number 1 is how to. If you're in front of a Wix website or a Squarespace website and you want to configure the form and you have some questions, you're actually in 100% focused on that activity, which is your main activity. And then you need a how-to guide. And when I look at the different types of medias you can use, video would be the most effective one. I want to see. I want my eyes to find the information, the visual information. I may use visual elements which are static images or so. I can read. And audio would basically be irrelevant. Second type of content is the content which is not how to. It's not aimed for me to stop everything I do. It's aimed to educate me. And this content, secondary education, is the content that you bump into over your day. And then you figure out that you would like to know what's written there, but it's not the optimal time for you to digest that. And then you may leave the tab open. We call it the open tab trap, where you keep the tab open for later, but later never comes. And this is where audio could be super relevant for you. But before we dive deeper into that, let's talk about the third type of content, which was around us for quite a while. And this is the crap people create for SEO, for search engines, and is aimed for Google search. So over the last few years, a lot of companies spend a lot of time and money creating content based on keyword research in order for their company to appear on search result pages on Google search. And the main motivation was to fit the content to keyword research and not to what people actually want to achieve. And I have good and bad news. If you've been creating content that's focused on SEO optimization based on keywords and so on, I'm happy to say that this type of content is basically not with us anymore. So it's kind of a recent update because only recently Google changed their algorithm, and this has a lot to do with AI. So let's go through a brief understanding of what's happening. For a while now, content is defined as king, and we want to use content to drive audience, and then we use keywords, and then Google identifies the content as relevant. And then Google needed to know which content is actually really worth the value and time of your users. And Google tried to figure out that if your content is longer, it's probably it has a higher quality and more relevance. So people started to create a very long content. Because creating longer content is hard, Google assumed that if you're creating a blog post which is 33,000 word long, people are going to digest that, and it's going to be very valuable for them. So an opportunity to put an endless amount of keywords and so on. But recently we found that we have AI around us. So ChatGPT and other engines allow us to create content very easily. So it doesn't really matter the length of the content because creating longer content is not hard anymore. So Google needed to find a strategy to deal with that. So the first element is that the length of the content doesn't really matter anymore. The second element is that while this happens, Google wanted to say that they're not going to support AI content at all. By the way, how do they know what content is based on the AI? I'm recently using a metaphor. Think of two robots walking on a street with many human beings around them. You'll probably assume that they know each other and they can identify easily which one of the people around them is a robot. So AI can use AI to understand what content is created by AI. And once they do that, they wanted to block that content. But then they figured out that this content can be valuable for users, so they don't really have a reason to block that. So the only thing that's left in that model and changed the recent Google algorithm structure is that the Google algorithm is going to be based on one element, which is a combination of different elements that combine into that. And this is trying to figure out whether the content is actually valuable for your audience. And you should keep in mind that Google are fighting the fight of their life with a new way of searching, because when you're using ChatGPT, you're not actually searching for an index of websites, you're searching for a question and you get the answer. So they need to be super relevant. And the only way they can do that is allow AI-based content to be used, but get feedback from users whether the page is actually relevant. And this is where you need more indications and more engagement on your page. And this is, interestingly, where audio becomes a super interesting way to show engagement. And I'm going to talk about how to do that. So going back to the three types of content, I'm going to focus on that content, which is what most companies do for their marketing. So they try to educate their audience and create awareness of the brand, so they can actually get followers and offer whatever they offer. And when I talk about content consumption, this is where I want to ask where your audience is. So let me use a chart I've been using for quite a while. This is a chart that's based on research and showing basic structure of different types of content consumption and the time of the day. So we have the different devices and their place in our time. So smartphones could be used for a very short time, but many times per day. We talk about, I have reference for statistics that talk about the fact that we consume content and use our smartphones between 140 times per day to 220 times per day. And it's mostly used for very short actions. So you can see that the width of the device actually represents the length of the activity. So we have tablets, which are basically disappearing. There are not too much left of them, but their process, the action of their users is usually much longer, and it's in the beginning of the day or in the evening. And this is kind of being kind of there is around 2 to 4% usage of tablets. And then we talk about desktop, which is where we spend most of our day if we are working in an office. And the length of the actions is much longer. So we use our device for 1 hour, 2 hours or more, go to a break and then go back and go to lunch and go back and so on. And in the evening, most of us open TV and keep it open for all of their evening. And this chart is actually something I'm using on a daily basis to ask questions about the situations of where your audience is at. So it's nice that you've just written a blog post about something and you put it on your website or even published an ebook, a white paper or a report. And when I'm looking at your audience, they basically probably get to that while they're at work. So they would be at their desktop and then they bump into your content. But usually what happens is that they're not available to consume it. So if you created an ebook, you may expect them to read that while they're on their desktop, but they are trying to be productive and work. And later on, they will find themselves at the evening in front of the TV, and there's no way your ebook is going to get attention. And next morning, while they're on their mobile, they're not going to read that ebook. So what basically happens, and we see that from statistics, is that nobody reads ebooks. They do download them, but then they never get back to them. And this is also happening when you create a very long blog post, which is super valuable, but we don't really have the time to digest that. So then back to the question, when do you expect your audience to consume your content? And I would like my audience to consume my content while they have the time to do so, while they're driving, while somebody else is driving, while they're washing the dishes, while they're doing their sport activity with dog walking or whatever. And this is where they don't have a screen in front of them. And this opens the door to the opportunity that's called audio communication, which is not podcast based, because I would like to allow my content, which is not a podcast, an educational thing, to find its way to that time of the day. So I'll give you an example. Here's a screenshot from our blog, and you can see that we have a very long content that's super interesting. So you may want to read that. And some of our clients wanted us to add a player. But when you look at that content, you see that people who bump into that may be in their working hours in front of their desktop. So they look at that, and even though they just discovered something that's interesting for them, they're not available to actually digest that. And what happens later on over the day is that they're going to get into their car later on and listen to whatever they have on their smartphone. But if I would ask them what they would like to listen to, and I would give them the opportunity to actually choose and not just click on the play on their podcast app and listen to the next thing up. If they would be able to choose, they would want to choose the content that they actually discovered as relevant on their desktop, but it's not waiting for them. And this is where I created a concept called Plater. So it's a name of a process and a service that we offer. And the idea behind it is that we're not going to just put a player on your blog. We're going to actually put the player, allow you to play, but understand that you're probably not available for listening. The same way you're not available to reading, but you may be available to listen later. And this is where we would offer you the option to click on listen later, send it to your mobile. This could be a lead gen engine, or directly send you to this page and allow you to scan the code, share that with yourself in your kind of personal list, send a text message, or schedule, which is another element that's going to appear here over the next few days. The ability to actually schedule the right time in my calendar to listen to that content, which I just identified as valuable. So this is the Plater concept, because what I would like them to do is go back to that situation where they discovered content, but consume it while they're on the go with a mobile device. And this is where we're offering the same content that can be consumed in a web-based interface, which is audio first, and allows you to listen while you're on the go. But this could also offer a different way of communication. Think of a company sending a package to a client of yours, and then they are in their workshop opening that box, and you would like to speak to them at that point. So it doesn't need to be a podcast. It could be instructions, manual, or some information that they need to know. And this is why I put a QR code here, because this is where you can get the player that would explain everything you need to know about that product. So I'd like to share with you what Summurai is all about. So we created a platform that allows audio content to live outside of the podcast world and provide a way for companies to communicate with their audience. And Summurai is basically a one-stop shop platform that allowing you to create content, audio content, to manage it, to share it, and to track the behavior that's created, and also connect it to your different business engines, such as lead gen and other elements. So we're going to be able to offer you the ability to create content using AI voices, which are mind-blowing, and I'm going to share that with you in a second. And we use the best models that's out there. We're going to wrap that content in a player, a branded web-based player, which I'm going to talk about in a second, that can be shared with your audience. We will provide the ability for you to track and see what's working for you, to learn how people actually consume that content. We will be able to give you the opportunity to use the Plater element and embed this type of content in your different business assets. And we will offer you to connect that to your lead gen engine and track behavior and identify intent, because we actually have the ability to know who's listening to what content when it comes to audio, which is something that text doesn't provide. All of this is going to be in one single platform. So we basically bring the power of audio content to your business. The idea of one-stop shop provides both the ability to create the content and to share and track it in the same place and create your interfaces. So the basic element we created is an object called a SAMI. A SAMI is an interesting and new content unit, which based on 5 elements. First one of them is the branded content. This is a web-based interface. It does not require to install any app because your audience doesn't have the time and motivation to do so. So the web-based interface gets your brand identity and colors and so on. We have a visual. This could be one visual or more, so I can actually swipe and see images, or also embed a video element if it makes sense. I have the text, which is the original piece of message I wanted to share. It doesn't have to be too long. We actually aim for around 400 to 600 word long items. Then we put the audio layer, which allows the audience to skip reading and actually just listen. And the other element that you don't see on other podcast platforms, because they don't want to give you this ability, is the call to action button, which is aimed to move you to the next phase in the funnel after consuming the content. A playlist is a higher level, which basically combines a few SAMIs. So we actually create a playlist. A playlist could be something that's growing ongoingly, some kind of feed that whenever we have a new item, it's loaded to the playlist. Or it could be a closed thing. We have 7 SAMIs wrapped and curated into a playlist, and it's fixed, and it's everything you need to know about a subject, similar to any other playlist you may know. And this allows us to share information, and you can see the call to action button appearing on top of the playlist as well. Embedding the player could be done in different ways. So basically you have the ability to put the player and embed it in your blog, or also create an audio channel. If you use the player element, the ability to add it to your calendar basically opens a Calendly-like interface, which allows you to choose the time that you would like to consume the content and commit to that, and then follow up with a reminder. And you can also see things like an interface that can be showing you multiple content items, and you could actually create a playlist. So if you create a playlist, you would be able to listen to that content later on. Playlist elements are kind of a new form of an ebook. So you can see some kind of a demo design for what a playlist would look like. And each playlist could actually look like a list of items that have been curated and wrapped as an audio thing. Behind the scenes, we have a very robust admin system that's used in order for us to be able to learn. So you can see the playlist, you can see the list of items. You can see that in each one of the items, we have the ability to actually learn what's working for you. So a lot of information. You can see here the number of how many people got to the content, how many of them listened, how many stayed until the end, and how many of them clicked the call to action button. We can get charts of audio engagement, and we can see what times of the day and what hours they're actually consuming that. So this brings me to another quick chapter to talk about the element of audio production. And then I'll share with you some case studies and behind the scenes. So let's talk about audio production. For a while now, we've been creating audio, and it was kind of complex thing because companies wanted to use our services and they wanted us to create audio. So because they didn't have the operation and production ability to create audio on their own. So we offered audio production with Jason and some other narrators. And this is where professional narration comes into place, and we can actually do that. It's not that expensive, and it doesn't take that long, but it still needs the person involved. And over time, one of the things that I found out is that there's another option, which is bring your own voice. So even if you don't have that optimal production equipment, if you record your voice with simple recording apps and you use that recording, we're going to get a much more authentic message. And authentic always wins. Even if your professional narrator is super interesting, whenever the real person behind the content who's really passionate about what they do, they speak, you find it much more interesting and much more appealing than having a very professional narrator saying something that they actually don't understand or don't believe in. And one of the things that I think we will see more over time is companies provide the actual people who work behind the company and allow them to share the information with their audience and actually record that on their own. So I think this actually is worth thinking about and testing. The third option, which I always had in my slides, but I didn't talk about that too much, was text-to-speech engines, which I've been playing with for, I think, a decade now. Text-to-speech engines have been impossible. And I'm going to share an example with you. So this is text-to-speech 7 years ago.
Hello, my name is Voice Aloud Reader. I can read documents out loud for you.
So this is basically horrible. We cannot listen to that. My brain shuts down and it doesn't want to continue listening to that. Even though I have the ability to digest that content and understand what she was just saying, I don't want to do that. And if the content is going to be long, I'm not going to be able to digest that. 3 years ago, audio text-to-speech was actually evolving into that.
Google Cloud Text-to-Speech converts text into human-like speech in more than 180 voices across 30-plus languages and variants.
So you can see that it was much better, but it was still very monotonous and hard to listen to. And he was actually using the wrong pronouncement because he was saying converts instead of converts. And then your brain doesn't really want to communicate with such a person that doesn't really speak fluently. But over the last few months, with the evolution of AI around us, a dramatic change appeared on the evolution of audio text-to-speech, AI-based content production, and this is how it could look like or sound like.
Ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your hats because this is one bizarre sight. We have reports of an enormous fluffy pink monster strutting its stuff through downtown.
So you can see that you had the ability to actually listen to that and hear the breathing of that person. This became completely human, and we have a hard time to figure out that it was actually produced by AI and there was no human being behind the text that I just let you hear, the audio that I let you hear. And I think audio, AI-based audio has moved into a situation where in certain situations, doesn't make sense to actually work with professional narrators unless you want a very, very specific tone of voice and the authenticity of your message. And I want to take you one step further. What happened over the last few months or so is that we found a new way, technology brought us a new way to combine the idea of bringing your own voice with text-to-speech. This is called voice cloning, and this is mind-blowing. So I'm actually going to share with you an example of myself speaking Spanish. Just before I do that, let me share with you the fact that I don't have any idea, any experience in speaking Spanish. It sounds like this.
En los últimos días he estado trabajando duro para mejorar mi español. Intenté mejorar y aprender a decir algunas frases que mostraran a todos lo bien que hablo y lo estoy haciendo muy bien.
So you can see that I have a very good accent in my Spanish that doesn't exist, and this was actually based on 2 minutes of my audio recording in English. And now I can have the ability to produce any type of audio without the need to actually record that. So this basically opens the door to creating much more audio content, which is friendly and easy to listen to without the need to actually record. Even though I think real recording is still much better than that.
En los últimos...
So going back to the platform, I want to share with you that once you have audio content, you have the ability to track it. And this is how statistics on content on audio consumption look like. So you can see 3 different charts showing you different behaviors. Here you can see that most people started to listen and stayed until the end. And there's kind of a small number of people who actually didn't get through the whole message. We have the second category, and here we see that we reduce the number of people who we see that not all of them stayed until the end. So people started, but something caused them to stop, some of them. And this could be a situation where the content is irrelevant or the narrator who's actually speaking is not easy to listen to. So this is what would happen if the audio text-to-speech engine, the second one or the first one, was actually would be presented. People will actually decide not to continue listening, or unless it's irrelevant for them. And the third one shows you where people are basically starting to listen, and a lot of them actually lose attention over time. And this could be also something that is related to the length of the content, the relevance of the content, the tone of voice, the storytelling, and many other parameters. But we have a lot of abilities to learn how people behave. And this is something that you don't have when you create textual content, and you usually don't have when you create video. If you look at traffic, we can see the hours of the day, and we can see that usually audio content is consumed on the afternoon and evening, which is where we're actually more available. So if I go back to the chart of when would you like your audience to consume your content, the answer is whenever they have time, because in the main hours of the day, working hours, they're busy. So I do want the content to be consumed in the evening, and I can also see where they came from and so on. So a lot of statistics that we can share about content consumption. So let's talk about how to produce content. And I actually wanted to show you a live, an example of the platform. Instead of showing you the slides that I created, I think it would be best to actually go to the platform itself and take you to a live visit to Summurai. So I'm very happy to introduce you to Summurai if you haven't been here before. I'm going to log into the system. So this is live, and I hope everything will work fluently. Usually when you show things on a presentation, everything breaks, but we're going to do the best. I'm managing multiple brands, so I'm going to get to the Summurai brand. And you can see that I'm managing multiple playlists. We can actually look at the first one, which is going to be an example I'll share with you. But let's start with the audio production. So if you don't have an audio file ready to be used, you may want to go to the Voice Studio and get started here. So the Voice Studio basically allows you to create audio content with our awesome avatar friends. And this content can be created here. So you can actually write the title and create the content that you want to produce. I can use an example that's ready for testing, or I can do something else. If I'll go to this blog post, which I set before, I can actually import an existing blog post and enjoy the fact that we have all of this information ready to be shared. Since this content was actually originally created for reading, it's much more formal than the content that I would like to have spoken. And this is where we embedded AI tools to allow you to optimize that content and make it more audio friendly. So when you use that process, you're going to get an edited version of the content, which is much more audio friendly. We are going to combine some different types of processes that do that in different ways, and also wrap your content in a very specific length and type of setup for narration. So this is where AI allows us to edit your content and make it more friendly. Let's go back to that. And now we can see that we have different avatars here, and they are super friendly. So we can, for example, meet Mary. Let's hear what she has to say.
Hey, I'm Mary. It would be awesome to record some audio for you. You probably know Siri or Alexa, but let's face it, my voice is way better.
So we have a very interesting demo of a real AI-based audio, which is super impressive. And we have different avatars who bring different personalities and tones of voice. So if you'll hear Dave, for example.
Hey, I'm Dave, and I'm here to turn content into audio. Audio fits seamlessly into the listener's daily routines.
And we can hear Mike, for example.
Hey, I'm Mike, and we can do audio together. For those who may have visual impairments or reading challenges, audio content ensures they're not left out of the conversation.
So whenever you jump into creating audio content, one of the things that you have to figure out is what tone of voice you would like to bring. The voice of Mike brings a trustworthy professional voice, and it's very easy to listen to if you're sharing information such as medical guidance and you want to get it from a very somebody you can trust. So we have different avatars. We're adding more and more avatars on the go. Let's take Stephanie and let's ask Stephanie to record this content. And here we actually have to wait for Stephanie and give her a few seconds to take care of the recording. We're going to be quiet and let her do her job. While she does that, I'll tell you that if you compare it to other engines of audio creation, you can find that we do things very smoothly. The interface is much more appealing than what you'll find in any of the other audio production tools. But this is not the main thing, because the main thing from my point of view is the fact that this is just where the party starts. Once you're getting audio in the other tools that are out there, you actually find yourself stuck with an MP3 file you don't have where to put. And what we actually built is the ability for you to go on with the process and actually have your content wrapped and ready to be shared, tracked, and provide the business effect that you want to achieve. And this is basically our main added value that starts when Stephanie is going to complete her recording. So I'll let Stephanie continue. It will take a few more seconds and wrap that piece of content so we can actually use that. Let's wait for Stephanie. That's it. Stephanie completed recording the content. In some situations, it's interesting what Stephanie does that even quicker than actually a live recording of the content. So if it's 3 minutes, she usually completes recording 3 minutes within less than 1 minute, which is kind of strange, but it happens. And now we have the summary ready. Let's look at the summary. We can listen to that.
Welcome to our dojo. While content consumption has evolved for far too long, your textual content has stayed the same. It's time to get audio and AI to work for you and bring...
Another added value of audio is that you can listen faster. And now we're going to edit it. Let's go to the editor and change the visual element. So I'm able to use the search engine. Let's look for, I don't know, let's look for a visual from Japan. I'm going to take this one. I'm going to change the visual to that. And let's add a call to action. Schedule a demo. And this happens on the summurai.com/contact page. And it's ready. We can actually save. And we have our Summy ready to be shared. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share it into a playlist that I've been creating before. So let's take the Summurai Live Demos playlist and publish. So it's going to take us just one more click, and this is published in a playlist that's actually ready to be shared. Let's go and see our new playlist. So here's a new playlist. I'm going to click on the view. You're going to see that the playlist is ready to be shared. This is the new item that we just created. Welcome to our dojo. And this playlist is actually gated, so I don't have the ability to access the content. I have to register. So one of the meanings of that is that if you want to consume the content, we can actually allow playlists to be either gated or open. I'm going to change the privacy and make it open. So let's reload the playlist and click on play.
Welcome to our dojo. While content consumption has evolved for far too long.
So you can see that this is actually working pretty smoothly, but my main concern is how this is going to be consumed on the go. Let's use our mobile simulator, and you can see that this is the playlist that it created. If I go to the item, you can click on play, and welcome to the dojo. Here's the item. You can see the text. You can also see the call to action button.
Welcome to our dojo.
Here.
While content consumption has evolved for far too long,
faster, and you can click on the schedule a demo, which will open the URL that I placed before. Going back to our dojo, let's show some behind the scenes. I'm going to use an example to share with you some insights and information that we have about our audience. So let's look at this playlist, for example, and you can see that while I have a lot of content here, you can click on the show stats and see how many people got to the content, how many people played, and how many of them actually stayed until the end. So you can see that the numbers, and these are real numbers, are pretty awesome. People actually, 90% of people actually listen to the whole thing. And when you look at the statistics, I have the ability to know how many of them started and stayed until the end. And you can see that this content consumption statistics are pretty mind-blowing. You can see the time of the day, the hours, you can see where they came from, you can see what are the traffic sources and so on, and a lot of information that allows me to understand what's working. Going to the embedded player, so we can see that within our blog, the main message is don't read our blog because you don't have time for that. And this is why whenever you get to our blog posts, you will see the play later element. So instead of playing, you can click on the listen later and get the player that I mentioned before. And we are working on a new model that will actually allow, if I go back to the playlist that you've seen before, this to be using a gated content. Let me add the fact that you actually can get the playlist in multiple languages. So you can actually add the same content in audio in Spanish and have a language icon here that allows you to actually get content, same content in Spanish. Going back to an example that I wanted to share with you. So a couple of days ago, we are offering a new concept of people who own a podcast to actually wrap their content in a branded playlist. The idea is to create a curated playlist. So let's assume that you have 50 podcast episodes. And besides the fact that you do it on a weekly basis, it would make sense to wrap some of the content in a very specific playlist for a specific audience. So let's assume that chapters, episodes 17, 24, and 65 are basically, they have something common, and you would like to use that for lead gen. So we actually offer the ability to import existing blog posts. So you can actually create an item, use our import podcast episodes, and search for your podcast. Let's search for a podcast, and then you can actually go through the episodes and load any episode that's out there into your playlist and actually wrap that in a lead gen engine. But I want to talk about an alternative to an ebook. So originally, I would create a long-form PDF document and put it with a gate and ask people to download it in return for their email. So we wanted to create that, and instead of an ebook, we actually wanted to create a guide of how podcasters could earn money or create a connection with their audience. So we decided to create the Airwaves to Income playlist. The Airwave to Income playlist actually includes 9 items, and the production of them was based on me speaking with ChatGPT, trying to figure out what would be a great content for podcast producers. So I was asking questions, ChatGPT gave answers, and I asked ChatGPT to wrap it in a ready for narration content. We split it into different chapters, and we wrapped it, and I imported the text, copied it to our platform, turned it into a playlist, and you can see that it's actually ready to be shared. When you get to the playlist and you click on play, you'll find out that you have to register because we would like to have your information. So once you do that, you need to provide your information. And once we have you as a registered user, we have the ability to track and identify your intent, as well as promote whatever call to action button or activity we wanted to share with you. So this is our gated offer that's kind of ready to be used. You can actually log in back. And I can share with you that we're combining with that nowadays with the idea of scheduling, because if you see this list and you see that it's actually 38 minutes long, you would say that you don't have the time to consume it now, but you have that traffic jam waiting later on. So our player scheduler is going to be combined here. And in a few days, we're actually going to offer the idea of once you're in and we have your information, go on and put it in your schedule, and let's commit to listening to the content whenever it works for you, which makes much more sense than the way we offer content nowadays. So I'd like to go back to my presentation and wrap things up for you. I showed you a live demo of everything, so you can believe that it's actually working. I can tell you that the last playlist I created took me 29 minutes. This playlist was actually something that I worked on for, I think, less than 1 hour and a half. And I was having it ready to be shared and promoted on social media. And if I go to my final thought, I think the right way to promote content nowadays and actually make it easy to consume by busy people who are your audience is by following the next guides. Make sure that it's relevant and it actually solves a problem that's relevant for your audience right now. This is pretty trivial if you're into content. Second element is timing. Try to offer it in the right time, in the right timing, in the right process. This is where we open the door to communicating and sharing information across the customer journey, and putting it in a way that allows audience to consume the content on the go, and actually get it on the right situation. So if you just registered to a service or you went out of a shop and you got into your car, this would be an ideal timing. So you can push that content. The next thing is keeping it concise. And I don't mean that you need to say whatever you want in 3 minutes. In certain cases, and you've seen playlist of my own, which is 29 minutes long or 38 minutes long, and it's worth the time, but it's broken into pieces, and each one of them is around 4 minutes, and it actually answers the question. So keeping it concise and creating a playlist based on different items that combine into a playlist is much more effective way to provide content, and it fits the motivation and attention span of human beings in 2024. And it would be much more relevant for you to promote that instead of a very long piece of content. And lastly, the ability to listen makes the decision-making around consuming that much simpler than whenever you look at a very long piece of audio, video, or text, and try to figure out when you're going to get to that, because the answer is never. So I think it's time to bring audio content and fit it into your audience and journeys. Turn your blog posts into an audio version. Rethink your ebooks and lead gen motivations. Rethink guides and sharing information, and use the tools that technology allows in order to promote audio content outside of the podcast world. And I, of course, invite you to join us and enjoy everything we have on our system. If you would like to schedule a demo and learn more about what we can do together, you're more than welcome to contact us and do so. If you'd like to test our system directly, go on and log in at summurai.com, and you'll get 10 credits you can actually use for your purposes and try and use our voice studio and create your own content. And you saw it. It's pretty straightforward. You can do that, and let's make some noise and bring a more effective content communication to the world. I think everybody needs that, and it's time to do so. So I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the fact that you found the time to dive into that and spend your time with me. If you find the tools relevant and want to test things or talk about the right way to implement that, we will be more than happy to schedule some time and think together what would be optimal for your motivations. And I hope I was able to open your mind and door to a new world that's actually evolving and is going to be super promising. And we hope to be able to bring knowledge to busy people in a much easier way. So thank you so much for joining me, and keep in touch.